At 70, I was facing the fact that I had spent my entire life being my own worst enemy. I had been kinder to strangers than I had ever been to myself. I had forgiven everyone except the person in the mirror. The harsh voice in my head had been my constant companion for 7 decades, and I suddenly realized I was running out of time to change that relationship. Learning to love myself at 70 felt impossible, but it turned out to be the most important thing I ever did. My name is Margaret, and this is my story of finally making peace with myself after 70 years of internal warfare. If you've spent your life believing you're not good enough, if you're harder on yourself than you would ever be on another person, if you think it's too late to change how you feel about yourself, this story is for you. I'm about to share isn't just about self-love. It's about breaking free from a lifetime of learned self-hatred, discovering that the voice in your head doesn't have to be your enemy, and realizing that it's never too late to become your own best friend. For as long as I could remember, there had been a voice in my head that never had anything nice to say about me. It was always there, like background music I couldn't turn off, constantly commenting on everything I did wrong. You look terrible in that dress. You're not smart enough to understand that. Everyone thinks you're boring. You're too old. Too fat, too stupid, too much, not enough. This voice was so familiar that I thought it was just part of being me. I assumed everyone had a critic living in their head, constantly pointing out their flaws and failures. I didn't know that other people might actually like themselves, might speak to themselves with kindness, might believe they deserved good things. The voice had been with me since childhood. It sounded like my mother when she told me I was too sensitive. It echoed my 5th grade teacher who said I'd never amount to much. It carried the tone of my ex-husband when he'd point out everything I did wrong around the house. Over the years, I had internalized every criticism, every disappointment, every harsh word, until they became my own thoughts about myself. By the time I was 70, this internal critic had become so automatic that I didn't even notice it anymore. It was just the soundtrack of my life, a constant stream of negativity that made me feel small, inadequate, and unworthy of happiness. The moment I realized what I'd done, the wake-up call came on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I was getting dressed to meet my daughter for lunch when I caught sight of myself in the full-length mirror. Without thinking, I immediately started the familiar litany. Look at those wrinkles. Your hair looks awful. That outfit makes you look fat. She's going to be embarrassed to be seen with you. But then something strange happened. I stopped mid-thought and really listened to what I was saying to myself. If my daughter had been standing next to me saying these things, I would have been horrified. If a stranger on the street had spoken to me this way, I would have been outraged. But somehow, it was acceptable for me to talk to myself with this level of cruelty. I stood there in front of the mirror and asked myself a question that changed everything. Would I ever talk to my daughter this way? The answer was an immediate and emphatic no. I would never dream of speaking to someone I loved with such harshness. I would never tell my daughter she was too old, too fat, or not good enough. I would never dismiss her accomplishments or focus exclusively on her flaws. So why was it okay to treat myself this way? That's when I realized what I had been doing for 70 years. I had been living with an abuser, and that abuser was me. As I stood in front of that mirror, I began to understand the price I had paid for a lifetime of self-criticism. The voice in my head hadn't made me better, stronger, or more successful. It had made me smaller. I had turned down opportunities because I didn't think I was qualified. I had avoided social situations because I assumed people wouldn't like me. I had stayed in relationships where I was treated poorly because I didn't believe I deserved better. I had apologized for my existence so many times that I had forgotten I had a right to take up space in the world. The self-criticism had affected every area of my life. I had chosen clothes that would help me disappear rather than clothes that made me feel good. I had avoided trying new things because I was afraid of failing. I had dismissed compliments and held on to criticisms like treasures. Most painfully, I realized that my children had grown up watching me tear myself down. They had learned that this was how women were supposed to treat themselves, with constant criticism and impossible standards. I had modeled self-hatred for the people I loved most in the world. At 70, I was exhausted from being at war with myself. I was tired of waking up each morning to face an enemy who lived inside my own head. I was running out of time to change this relationship, and I knew I had to try. That morning in front of the mirror marked the beginning of the most important journey of my life. I made a decision that felt both revolutionary and terrifying. I was going to learn to be kind to myself. I had no idea how to do this. After 70 years of self-criticism, kindness toward myself felt foreign and uncomfortable. But I knew I couldn't continue living the way I had been. If I was going to spend whatever time I had left on this earth, I wanted to spend it as a friend to myself, not an enemy. I started by trying to catch the voice when it started its familiar criticism. This was harder than I expected because the voice had become so automatic, so much a part of my mental background, that I often didn't notice it until it had already launched into a full attack. But gradually, I began to hear it. "You're such an idiot for forgetting where you put your keys. Stop. You look ridiculous trying to dance at your age. Stop. Nobody wants to hear your opinion about that. Stop." Each time I caught the voice, I tried to ask myself, would I say this to someone I loved? Replacing a lifetime of self-criticism with self-compassion was like learning a foreign language at 70. Every kind word I tried to say to myself felt awkward and fake. When I looked in the mirror and attempted to say, "You look nice today," it felt like lying. I started small. Instead of "You're so stupid for making that mistake," I practiced saying, "Everyone makes mistakes." Instead of "You're too old to try that," I tried, "It's never too late to learn something new." Instead of "Nobody wants to hear from you," I experimented with "Your thoughts and feelings matter." It felt ridiculous at first. I had spent 70 years perfecting the art of self-criticism, and suddenly I was supposed to become my own cheerleader. It didn't feel natural or authentic, but I kept practicing. I read books about self-compassion and learned that the voice in my head wasn't actually me. It was a collection of other people's voices that I had internalized over the years. I didn't have to keep carrying their criticisms around like precious belongings. I learned about something called the inner critic and discovered that I wasn't alone in this struggle. Millions of people, especially women, had been taught to be harsh with themselves as a way of staying humble, motivated, or acceptable to others. Most importantly, I learned that self-love wasn't selfish or narcissistic. It was actually the foundation for everything else. How could I truly love other people if I couldn't love myself? How could I create healthy relationships if my primary relationship, the one with myself, was toxic? One of the most surprising challenges I encountered was resistance from other people when I started being kinder to myself. Family members and friends who had been accustomed to hearing me put myself down seemed uncomfortable when I stopped doing it, when I refused to join in conversations about how awful I looked in photos. Some friends seemed puzzled. When I stopped apologizing for my opinions or taking up space in conversations, a few people acted annoyed. When I started saying no to things I didn't want to do instead of automatically agreeing and then criticizing myself for being a pushover, some family members accused me of becoming selfish. I realized that many people around me were also trapped in patterns of self-criticism, and my self-acceptance threatened their belief that harsh self-judgment was necessary or normal. Some people seemed to prefer the version of me that was always apologizing, always putting myself down, always making myself smaller to make others more comfortable. But I couldn't go back to that version of myself. I had tasted what it felt like to be my own friend, and I couldn't return to being my own enemy. Learning to love myself at 70 wasn't a sudden transformation. It was a gradual process that unfolded over many months. Some days were easier than others. Some days the old voice would return in full force, and I would find myself falling back into familiar patterns of self-attack. But slowly, something began to shift. The voice in my head started to soften. I began to notice beautiful things about myself instead of only flaws. I started to appreciate my resilience, my kindness to others, my creativity, my sense of humor, qualities I had possessed all along but had never acknowledged. I began to treat my body with more respect. Instead of criticizing my wrinkles and gray hair, I started to see them as evidence of a life well lived. Instead of hating my aging body, I began to appreciate all the ways it had served me over 7 decades. I started making choices based on what would make me happy rather than what would help me avoid criticism from myself. I bought clothes I liked instead of clothes that would help me disappear. I pursued interests that fascinated me instead of only doing things I thought I was supposed to do. Most surprisingly, I discovered that I was actually good company for myself. I enjoyed my own thoughts, my own sense of humor, my own perspective on the world. For 70 years, I had been so focused on my flaws that I had never noticed my strengths. As I learned to be kinder to myself, unexpected changes began to happen throughout my life. My relationships with other people improved because I was no longer desperately seeking their approval to compensate for my own self-rejection. I could listen to others more genuinely because I wasn't constantly worried about how I was being perceived. My physical health improved as well. The constant stress of internal criticism had been taking a toll on my body for decades. As I learned to speak to myself with compassion, I felt more relaxed, slept better, and had more energy. My creativity flourished. When I stopped criticizing every idea before I even tried it, I found myself willing to experiment with new hobbies, new foods, new experiences. I started painting again for the first time in 40 years, not because I was good at it, but because it brought me joy, perhaps. Most importantly, my relationship with my children and grandchildren deepened. When I stopped modeling self-hatred, I gave them permission to be kinder to themselves as well. Our conversations became more authentic because I was no longer performing the role of the self-deprecating woman who didn't take up too much space. My transformation had effects that extended far beyond my own life. My daughter told me that watching me learn to love myself had inspired her to examine her own self-talk. She realized that she had inherited many of my patterns of self-criticism and decided to work on being kinder to herself as well. My granddaughter, who was struggling with typical teenage self-doubt, began coming to me for advice. She said I was the only adult she knew who didn't constantly put herself down, and she wanted to learn how to have that kind of confidence. Friends began commenting on how different I seemed: lighter, happier, more present. Some asked what I was doing differently. When I told them about my journey towards self-love, several decided to examine their own relationships with themselves. I realized that by changing how I treated myself, I was giving other people permission to do the same. My self-acceptance was contagious in the best possible way. Learning to love myself required consistent daily practice. I developed routines and habits that helped me maintain this new relationship with myself. Each morning, I started my day by looking in the mirror and saying one kind thing to myself. It didn't have to be profound. Sometimes it was just, "Good morning, beautiful," or "I'm proud of you for getting up and facing another day." Throughout the day, I practiced catching my inner critic and replacing harsh thoughts with compassionate ones. When I made a mistake, instead of calling myself stupid, I would say, "I'm human, and humans make mistakes." When I felt insecure about something, instead of focusing on my inadequacies, I would remind myself of my strengths. In the evening, I would write down 3 things I appreciated about myself that day. This practice helped me notice positive qualities and actions that I had previously overlooked. I also learned to treat myself with the same care I would give to a good friend. I bought myself flowers, took baths when I was stressed, chose activities that brought me joy rather than just fulfilling obligations. After 2 years of practicing self-love, I've learned that it's not about thinking you're perfect or never acknowledging areas for growth. It's about treating yourself with basic human kindness and respect. Self-love means speaking to yourself the way you would speak to someone you care about. It means acknowledging your mistakes without making them evidence of your fundamental worthlessness. It means celebrating your successes instead of dismissing them or attributing them to luck. I learned that self-criticism doesn't actually motivate positive change. It just makes you feel terrible about yourself. Self-compassion, on the other hand, creates a safe internal environment where growth and learning can actually happen. Most importantly, I learned that it's never too late to change your relationship with yourself. I spent 70 years being my own worst enemy, but in just 2 years, I've become my own best friend. If I can do this at 70, anyone can do it at any age. Advice for others on this journey: for anyone struggling with self-criticism and wondering if they can learn to love themselves, I want you to know that it's possible. Here's what I've learned that might help. Start by noticing the voice. Most of us don't even realize how harshly we speak to ourselves because it's become so automatic. Begin by simply paying attention to your internal dialogue. Ask yourself, would I say this to someone I love? This question helped me recognize how unnecessarily cruel I was being to myself. Practice speaking to yourself like you would speak to a good friend. This feels awkward at first, but it gets easier with repetition. Challenge the belief that self-criticism is helpful. I had spent decades thinking that being hard on myself would make me better, but it actually just made me smaller and more afraid. Be patient with the process. Changing a lifetime of thinking patterns takes time. Be as gentle with yourself during this journey as you're learning to be in general. Seek support if you need it. Therapy helped me understand where my patterns of self-criticism came from and gave me tools for changing them. Remember that self-love is not selfish. Taking care of your relationship with yourself makes you better able to love and care for others. As I write this, I'm 72 years old, and I can honestly say that these have been the happiest years of my life. Not because everything is perfect, but because I finally have a friend living inside my own head instead of an enemy. I wake up each morning looking forward to my day instead of dreading it. I try new things without the paralyzing fear of failure. I enjoy my own company and feel comfortable in my own skin for the first time in my life. The voice in my head still sometimes tries to criticize, but now I recognize it for what it is: old programming that no longer serves me. I can choose not to listen to it, or I can respond to it with compassion instead of believing everything it says. People often tell me that I seem younger, happier, more confident than I was 2 years ago. I think that's what happens when you stop carrying the weight of constant self-judgment. You have more energy for everything else. If you're reading this and recognizing yourself in my story, please know that it's not too late for you. Whether you're 30, 50, 70, or 90, you can learn to be kinder to yourself. You don't have to spend whatever time you have left being your own worst enemy. The relationship you have with yourself is the longest relationship of your life. It's worth investing in that relationship, worth learning to make it loving and supportive instead of critical and harsh. You deserve to be treated with kindness, especially by yourself. You deserve to feel worthy of love, happiness, and good things in life. You deserve to take up space in the world without apologizing for your existence. Learning to love myself at 70 was one of the best decisions I ever made. It's never too late to become your own best friend. Thank you for letting me share my journey with you. If this story resonates with you, please share it with someone who might need to hear that self-love is possible at any age. And remember, the voice in your head doesn't have to be your enemy. You can choose kindness instead. What's one kind thing you could say to yourself today? I'd love to hear from others who are learning to be gentler with themselves. Share your journey in the comments below. We all need reminders that we're not alone in this.